Reports surrounding the royal family have reignited debate over the balance of influence within the monarchy, with growing speculation that King Charles has increasingly shifted institutional authority toward Catherine, Princess of Wales, rather than Queen Camilla. While no constitutional powers have changed hands, observers argue that the significance lies in who is being entrusted with the monarchy's long-term public role. According to recent claims, Camilla made a final attempt to strengthen her position within the institution, only for the proposal to be rejected swiftly and without meaningful consideration. If those reports are accurate, the response was more than a personal disagreement. It reflected a deliberate institutional judgment. Viewed in context, the developments appear less like a sudden change in direction and more like the culmination of a strategy that has been unfolding gradually, largely overshadowed by other royal controversies. To understand why these claims continue to attract attention, it is necessary to revisit the events surrounding Charles and Camilla's marriage in 2005. At that time, the public understanding was that Camilla would be known as Princess Consort, rather than Queen, should Charles eventually become king. This was not an unofficial rumor, but a position communicated publicly by the palace during a period when public sentiment remained deeply influenced by the legacy of Diana, Princess of Wales. The distinction carried considerable political and symbolic importance. It reflected the monarchy's awareness of public opinion and its efforts to preserve confidence in the institution during a particularly sensitive period. The conversation evolved over time. In 2022, ahead of her Platinum Jubilee, Queen Elizabeth II publicly expressed her wish that Camilla would be recognized as Queen Consort when Charles succeeded to the throne. Following the Queen's death later that year, King Charles ascended the throne, and Camilla assumed the title of Queen Consort. For some observers, this represented a natural progression following the late Queen's endorsement. Others viewed it as a significant departure from the expectations established years earlier, reinforcing the perception that the monarchy had adapted its messaging in response to changing circumstances. Even after assuming her new title, reports have consistently suggested that Queen Camilla's influence within the institution remained more limited than many expected. Royal commentators have claimed that key strategic discussions, including long-term planning, succession matters, and broader decisions about the monarchy's future direction, were handled within a relatively small circle, with Camilla's office reportedly playing a less prominent role. While she continued to fulfill ceremonial duties and represent the crown at major state occasions, speculation persisted that the most significant institutional decisions were being shaped elsewhere. Questions have also surrounded Camilla's role in areas such as charitable priorities, public engagement, and long-term communication strategy. Although these claims remain unverified by Buckingham Palace, they have contributed to a broader narrative that ceremonial prominence does not necessarily translate into substantial institutional influence. Within royal circles, titles and public appearances are only one measure of authority. Strategic responsibility is often viewed as the more significant indicator of standing inside the monarchy. Attention has also focused on the relationship between Queen Camilla and Catherine, Princess of Wales. Publicly, interactions between the two have consistently been courteous and professional, reflecting the standards expected of senior working royals. However, royal commentators have frequently suggested that the relationship has been defined more by mutual professionalism than personal closeness. While there has been little public evidence of conflict, there has also been limited indication of a particularly close partnership. Their respective positions within the royal family have naturally placed them in different roles with different responsibilities. Camilla entered the monarchy later in life through marriage to the future king, while Catherine has long been viewed as a central figure in the institution's future, as the wife of the heir to the throne. That distinction has inevitably shaped public perception, with many analysts arguing that Catherine increasingly represents the monarchy's long-term vision, while Camilla's role remains closely associated with the reign of King Charles. As a result, every reported shift in influence or responsibility is closely scrutinized, not simply as a matter of personal relationships, but as a reflection of how the palace is preparing for the next chapter of the monarchy. Whether recent reports ultimately prove accurate or not, They have intensified discussion about where authority is perceived to reside and how the institution is positioning its future leadership. Behind palace walls, however, the situation was reportedly evolving in ways the public could not immediately see. If the relationship between Catherine and Queen Camilla had never been especially close, some royal observers began asking whether that distance would eventually translate into a redistribution of influence. While headlines remained dominated by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, their media ventures, and continuing public disputes, attention inside the institution was allegedly shifting elsewhere. According to multiple reports and royal commentators, the Princess of Wales was steadily building influence through consistency rather than publicity. Her public engagements were no longer viewed simply as ceremonial appearances. Instead, they were increasingly interpreted as part of a broader effort to establish credibility within the monarchy's long-term agenda. Rather than relying on image alone, Catherine was said to be investing in substance. Royal sources have suggested she focused on demonstrating competence, reliability, and an ability to deliver measurable outcomes. While other members of the royal family frequently found themselves at the center of media controversy, Catherine appeared to concentrate on institutional responsibilities, strengthening her standing over time. Her early childhood initiative became one of the clearest examples of that strategy. Unlike traditional royal patronages that often revolve around symbolic support, the project reportedly brought together scientists, medical experts, academics, and senior government officials to examine childhood development and neuroscience. Palace observers noted that this represented a more policy-oriented approach than the royal family had pursued in decades. The initiative allowed Catherine to participate in discussions normally reserved for policymakers and specialists, rather than simply attending ceremonial events. Her public messaging increasingly focused on research, evidence, and long-term social outcomes. According to those familiar with the project, she developed a reputation for following through on commitments and maintaining close involvement in its progress. That level of engagement reportedly strengthened her credibility not only with the public, but also within the institution itself. Then came the events of early 2024, which dramatically altered the landscape for the royal family. Following abdominal surgery in London, Catherine publicly announced that subsequent medical testing had revealed she had cancer. The statement immediately transformed what had already been a challenging period for the monarchy. At a time when King Charles was also receiving cancer treatment, the institution suddenly faced two major health crises involving its most senior figures. The public response was remarkable in both its scale and sincerity. Messages of support poured in from across the United Kingdom and around the world. Crowds gathered outside Kensington Palace, leaving flowers and personal tributes in a spontaneous display of affection. Many commentators noted that such an emotional reaction had not been witnessed on a comparable scale since the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. For many members of the public, Catherine's openness and composure created an unusually strong sense of connection. Rather than engaging in constant public appearances, she released a carefully considered video message, explained her situation directly, and stepped away from royal duties to focus on treatment and her family. Throughout that period, she maintained a measured approach while keeping Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis largely shielded from public attention. Royal analysts argue that her handling of the crisis enhanced her standing significantly, demonstrating restraint, resilience, and stability during an exceptionally difficult period, reinforced the image she had cultivated over many years. Those qualities reportedly resonated not only with the public, but also with senior figures inside the palace. By the latter part of 2024, reports published by outlets including People magazine suggested that Catherine's conduct had prompted serious reflection within the king's inner circle. With King Charles managing his own illness, discussions increasingly centered on the monarchy's future leadership and which senior royals possessed both public confidence and institutional credibility. According to palace insiders cited in those reports, attention increasingly focused on Catherine. The central question became who could provide continuity during periods of uncertainty and help safeguard the institution through future challenges. Among many observers, the Princess of Wales was emerging as an increasingly obvious answer. Some reports further suggested that this gradual shift in perception did not occur through any single confrontation or dramatic disagreement. Instead, it reflected changing priorities within the palace itself. Influence, according to several royal commentators, often changes quietly before it becomes publicly visible. As Catherine's role expanded, some insiders claimed that advisors increasingly directed strategic discussions toward her office. The balance of influence, they argued, was beginning to evolve as preparations quietly continued for the monarchy's next generation of leadership. By the spring of 2025, speculation about internal changes had become the subject of widespread media reporting. Several publications claimed that King Charles was gradually transferring greater institutional responsibility toward the Princess of Wales. These reports suggested the changes extended beyond routine public engagements and reflected a broader redistribution of senior responsibilities. Royal correspondents noted that the reported adjustments did not resemble temporary arrangements designed to accommodate illness or scheduling pressures. Instead, some believed they indicated a longer-term transition in how responsibilities would be allocated within the senior ranks of the monarchy. One of the most closely watched aspects of these reports involved royal patronages. Within the constitutional monarchy, patronages represent far more than ceremonial titles. They establish long-term relationships with charities, cultural organizations, healthcare institutions, educational bodies, and community groups, often becoming a defining element of a senior royal's public role. According to several reports, a number of prominent patronages connected to arts, literature, and healthcare were being reassigned or increasingly associated with Catherine. If accurate, such changes would represent a significant institutional development, particularly given Queen Camilla's long-standing involvement with many of those organizations over the years. Beyond patronages, royal sources also described what they viewed as an even more consequential development. Catherine was reportedly gaining greater access to the king's senior advisory networks. Traditionally, a Princess of Wales would participate through established constitutional channels, while remaining outside many of the monarchy's most sensitive internal discussions. However, according to multiple palace commentators, that pattern was beginning to change. Catherine was increasingly said to be participating in conversations that had previously remained confined to the king, Queen Camilla, and their closest advisors. Observers argued that this suggested not merely growing confidence in her abilities, but a deliberate effort to prepare the future princess, and, by extension, Prince William, for greater institutional responsibility. For experienced royal analysts, the significance of these reported developments was difficult to ignore. Whether viewed as routine succession planning or as evidence of a broader redistribution of influence, the direction of travel appeared increasingly clear. The center of gravity within the royal household was, according to these reports, steadily moving toward the Prince and Princess of Wales. The evidence, at least as described by royal commentators and palace sources, suggested the king was beginning to view the Princess of Wales not simply as a future leader of the monarchy, but as a central figure whose influence was needed immediately. Buckingham Palace, as expected, offered no public acknowledgement of any such shift. That is consistent with how the institution has always operated. The royal household rarely explains internal decisions or evolving power dynamics through official statements. Instead, observers are left to interpret the monarchy through its actions, appointments, engagements, and carefully managed public appearances. For seasoned royal correspondents, those actions appeared to form an increasingly coherent pattern. Analysts who have spent decades interpreting the palace's institutional signals argued that too many developments pointed in the same direction to be dismissed as coincidence. According to reports from palace insiders, Queen Camilla was closely monitoring these developments. Publicly, she maintained the composed and dignified image she had spent years cultivating despite decades of intense scrutiny. Privately, however, sources claimed growing concern was beginning to surface. They suggested that an important response was taking shape, one that could become the most significant decision of her time as queen since her marriage to Charles. Royal biographer Angela Levin, who has long reported on the king and maintains contacts within royal circles, claimed that Camilla eventually sought formal reassurance about her future position within the monarchy. According to those accounts, she requested written confirmation that her royal status, official responsibilities, and remaining patronages would remain protected, despite Catherine's growing prominence and any future changes in public sentiment. If accurate, the request reflected a desire for institutional certainty during a period already marked by serious health challenges and heightened public attention. Sources characterize the move as a carefully worded but unmistakably firm demand. Rather than relying on verbal assurances, Camilla reportedly wanted documented guarantees that would secure her standing within the royal household. Yet, according to multiple reports, that proposal was rejected. There was no suggestion of dramatic confrontation or public disagreement. Instead, insiders described a measured but decisive response from the king's advisors. Their reported position was that the monarchy must preserve flexibility as circumstances evolve. From an institutional perspective, permanently committing authority or patronage through written guarantees could restrict the crown's ability to respond to changing public expectations, future successions, or broader strategic priorities. The message, according to those familiar with the discussions, was straightforward. Camilla would retain her title and continue fulfilling her constitutional role, but the palace was unwilling to formalize long-term authority over influence, charitable responsibilities, or internal standing. Such decisions, they argued, needed to remain adaptable rather than legally or administratively fixed. Those close to Camilla reportedly said she was deeply disappointed by the outcome. Yet there were no public displays of frustration and no obvious campaign to challenge the decision through media leaks. Instead, observers described a noticeable withdrawal. Within palace circles, that silence was widely interpreted as meaningful, a sign of dissatisfaction expressed through restraint rather than confrontation. While those tensions reportedly unfolded behind closed doors, the king's broader strategy appeared to be moving in a different direction altogether. Increasingly, attention within the monarchy seemed focused on preparing the institution for its next generation of leadership. If Charles's long-term vision centered on the Prince and Princess of Wales, questions inevitably arose about where that left Camilla in the years ahead. Since ascending the throne, King Charles has consistently promoted the concept of a streamlined monarchy. His vision has emphasized a smaller group of working royals, greater accountability, and a more focused allocation of official responsibilities. This has been presented not merely as rhetoric, but as an ongoing structural reform designed to modernize the institution for the decades ahead. That strategy has gradually reshaped perceptions of influence within the royal family. Increasingly, it has become evident which members remain central to the monarchy's future, and which figures are expected to assume less prominent roles over time. By many accounts, Charles sees the long-term stability of the crown resting primarily with Prince William and Catherine. They continue to command strong levels of public support, while representing a balance of continuity and modernization that many believe is essential to the monarchy's future. Within the king's reported strategic thinking, they possess both the credibility and the public confidence needed to guide the institution through an increasingly demanding political and media landscape. Reporting by publications including The Guardian and The Times has suggested that Charles has taken an active role in supporting Catherine's growing responsibilities. According to those reports, he has reviewed major speeches, helped facilitate opportunities that might otherwise have taken years to secure, and recognized the public significance of her recovery from cancer as part of the monarchy's wider message of resilience and continuity. Such accounts portray a monarch investing considerable political and institutional capital in preparing a future queen who can strengthen the crown's long-term position. Within that broader strategy, some commentators argue that Camilla occupies a more complex place. She has undoubtedly earned respect from many observers after enduring years of sustained criticism and transforming one of the most difficult public reputations in modern royal history into a level of broad acceptance. Her resilience has been widely acknowledged, and her contribution to the institution is not in question. However, analysts also note that her age, her personal history, and the lasting public associations with the Diana era continue to shape perceptions of her role. According to several royal commentators, Charles increasingly views Camilla as an important figure in the monarchy's present, but not necessarily as a defining figure in its long-term future. In that assessment, the institution's next chapter belongs to Catherine and the generation she represents. If that interpretation is accurate, it places Camilla in an increasingly difficult position, remaining a respected senior royal while watching the center of institutional influence gradually move elsewhere. Yet beyond questions of succession planning, constitutional reform, and public strategy lies a far deeper story. Many royal observers believe the choices being made today are influenced not only by present-day realities, but also by memories that have never fully disappeared from the House of Windsor. In many respects, the legacy of Princess Diana continues to cast a long shadow over the monarchy, shaping both its public image and the decisions that will define its future. There is a striking historical irony at the heart of the modern monarchy. After decades spent attempting to move beyond one of the most turbulent chapters in its history, King Charles is now reportedly shaping the institution's future around a queen whose public image continues to be measured against the legacy of Princess Diana. Any serious assessment of today's royal dynamics must acknowledge the enduring influence of the woman whose presence has loomed over the monarchy since August 1997. Princess Diana has been gone for nearly 3 decades. For many younger Britons, she belongs to history rather than lived memory. Yet her impact on public perceptions, particularly those surrounding Queen Camilla, remains remarkably resilient. Within the institution, Diana is far more than a historical figure. Her legacy continues to influence public expectations, media narratives, and the standards by which members of the royal family are judged. The monarchy may have sought to turn the page, but the past continues to define the boundaries of the present. That reality became particularly evident following Catherine, Princess of Wales's cancer diagnosis in early 2024. The public response was immediate and deeply emotional, prompting comparisons with the national mood that followed Princess Diana's death. While the circumstances were entirely different, the scale of public concern reflected a familiar pattern, a profound emotional investment in a royal figure perceived as authentic and relatable. Princess Diana's death after the Paris car crash marked one of the defining public moments of the late 20th century. The grief that followed was not manufactured by palace communications or media strategy. It was rooted in a genuine sense of personal connection. Diana had spent years presenting herself as approachable, despite the extraordinary constraints of royal life. Her willingness to engage directly with people, often without excessive ceremony, created a bond that few public figures have ever matched. The reaction to Catherine's diagnosis revealed that similar qualities continue to resonate with the public. For many, she represents stability, duty, and quiet resilience. The reminder of her vulnerability rekindled emotions that have shaped public attitudes toward the monarchy for decades. This presents an ongoing challenge for Queen Camilla. She may fulfill every constitutional responsibility expected of a senior royal, represent the crown with professionalism, and carry out a full program of public engagements. Those achievements command respect. However, respect is not necessarily the same as emotional loyalty. Public affection cannot be created through official appearances, careful messaging, or strategic communications alone. It develops over time through trust, consistency, and a sense of genuine connection. Inside royal circles, there is widespread recognition that this distinction matters. Reports have repeatedly suggested that King Charles understands the limits of public enthusiasm surrounding his wife and has adjusted aspects of the monarchy's long-term strategy accordingly. Reputation, after all, remains one of the institution's most valuable assets. Royal commentator Tina Brown has argued that the monarchy continues to operate under the shadow of the crises that defined the 1990s. That assessment remains difficult to dismiss. Many of the institution's decisions can still be viewed as attempts to avoid repeating the mistakes made during the Diana years. The handling of that period fundamentally altered the relationship between the monarchy and the British public, and its consequences continue to shape royal decision-making today. Against that backdrop, Catherine occupies a distinctive position. She has consistently projected an image of responsibility, sincerity, and commitment to family life, while carrying out her public duties. Her response to her cancer diagnosis only strengthened those perceptions. Rather than relying on traditional palace messaging, she addressed the nation in a personal and measured video statement that was widely praised for its openness and authenticity. Catherine is not attempting to replicate Princess Diana's role, nor does she appear interested in cultivating direct comparisons. Nevertheless, she embodies many of the qualities that first established Diana's unique relationship with the public: approachability, empathy, and credibility. That parallel is difficult for both the palace and the public to ignore. Nearly 30 years after Diana's death, her legacy remains one of the defining forces shaping Britain's constitutional monarchy. Far from fading with time, its influence continues to inform public expectations, institutional strategy, and the future direction of the royal family itself. This situation is not necessarily the result of a coordinated effort within the royal family to diminish Queen Camilla's role. Rather, it reflects a reality that has persisted for decades. A significant section of the British public never truly moved beyond the emotions and expectations shaped by the monarchy's past. Those sentiments have remained remarkably consistent, and as public attention increasingly centers on the Princess of Wales, the contrast has become more pronounced. Regardless of Queen Camilla's official duties or public engagements, she continues to operate under the weight of a legacy that remains difficult to escape. That raises a broader question about the direction of the monarchy itself. Queen Camilla spent many years seeking acceptance within both the institution and public life, before ultimately becoming Queen Consort. Yet just as she reached that position, the role itself appears to be evolving in ways that could limit its long-term significance. At the same time, Catherine, Princess of Wales, has found herself at the center of public attention while also navigating serious personal health challenges, raising her family, and fulfilling her constitutional responsibilities. She has become a central figure in discussions about the monarchy's future, whether she actively sought that position or not. King Charles III, meanwhile, is widely viewed as overseeing a period of significant institutional transition, while managing his own well-documented health concerns. The result is a monarchy balancing modernization with continuity, under considerable public scrutiny. These overlapping pressures have created one of the most closely watched periods in recent royal history. Historically, the British monarchy has demonstrated an extraordinary ability to preserve its stability by adapting gradually behind the scenes while maintaining an image of continuity. Constitutional historians frequently point out that shifts in influence within the royal household are nothing new. Across generations, titles have often remained unchanged, even as practical authority and public prominence have quietly shifted elsewhere. Holding a crown has never automatically guaranteed political or institutional influence. From that perspective, the current developments appear less like an isolated personnel adjustment and more like a carefully managed redistribution of visibility and responsibility. There has been no public effort to sideline or criticize Queen Camilla. Instead, the perception among many royal observers is that her role is becoming increasingly ceremonial, while greater public emphasis is placed elsewhere. If that interpretation proves accurate, it would reflect a long-established strategy within the institution, reshaping influence without creating unnecessary public controversy. This is why many analysts believe the current transition carries broader constitutional significance. It is not simply another change in staffing or communications strategy. Instead, it may signal how the palace intends to position the monarchy for the decades ahead. Increasingly, public attention and institutional expectations appear to be focused on the Prince and Princess of Wales, particularly Catherine, whose popularity consistently ranks among the highest within the royal family. From a strategic standpoint, this approach is understandable. Public confidence remains one of the monarchy's most valuable assets, and opinion polling has repeatedly indicated strong levels of support for both Prince William and Catherine. If the institution is preparing for its next chapter, strengthening the public profile of those viewed most favorably by the British public represents a logical long-term calculation. Seen through that lens, King Charles' reported decisions are less about personal preference and more about institutional survival. Throughout British history, monarchs have often been required to make difficult choices designed to protect the crown, rather than individual interests. Prioritizing the future reputation of the institution over personal relationships has been a recurring feature of royal history, however uncomfortable those decisions may appear. At the same time, it is important not to overlook the human dimension of these developments. Queen Camilla's journey to the throne was marked by decades of intense public criticism and media scrutiny. For many years, she remained one of the most controversial figures associated with the royal family, facing sustained criticism over events that shaped public perceptions for generations. Despite that, she continued to carry out official duties and gradually established a more accepted public role through consistent service. If her responsibilities are now being reduced in prominence, it inevitably raises difficult questions about the personal cost of institutional change. After years spent earning greater public acceptance and ultimately becoming Queen Consort, any perception that her position is being redefined in favor of a newer public focus would represent a significant personal adjustment. Ultimately, this reflects one of the enduring realities of constitutional monarchy. Institutions are designed to outlast the individuals who serve within them, and preserving public confidence often takes precedence over personal expectations. Throughout history, the Crown has repeatedly demonstrated its willingness to adapt when necessary, even when those adjustments carry consequences for members of the royal family themselves. If the current transition is indeed part of a broader strategy for the monarchy's future, it serves as another reminder that, within the institution, long-term continuity remains the overriding priority, even when that comes at a considerable personal cost.